The sterile stench of hospital disinfectant burned my throat, matching the steady, hollow beep of the heart monitor keeping time beside my bed. My eyes fluttered open through an anesthesia fog, expecting to see my husband holding my hand after a devastating spinal surgery. Instead, I was staring at a stranger holding a manila folder, while my husband stood at the foot of the bed with a cold, transactional look in his eyes. He didn't ask how the operation went or if the pain was manageable. He simply unfolded a stack of legal documents, tapped a line on the paper, and casually mentioned he had already filed for divorce. My body was completely broken from a military training accident, but the silence in that room felt far more painful than my damaged spine. I was a 32-year-old major in the United States Army who had spent 12 years serving my country with absolute discipline, yet nothing prepared me for the callousness of the man I had married 7 years ago. Julian looked at me like a failed investment, making it clear that he was keeping our home, our vehicles, and every luxury asset we owned. He leaned over my bed, dropped a pen into my trembling hand, and told me that a military salary of $7,000 a month meant I would never recover financially from this separation. I did not scream, cry, or attempt to correct his massive assumption. I simply dragged the pen across the dotted line, watched him take the folder with a quick nod, and watched him walk out of my life without a single backward glance. 3 days later, while I was taking my first agonizing steps in physical therapy, Julian married a young, wealthy socialite named Chloe in an extravagant vineyard ceremony. He believed he had stripped me of everything and left me with nothing to my name. He had no idea that my army pay stub was only a tiny fraction of my true net worth, or that he had just signed away his right to millions. To understand how Julian made such a catastrophic miscalculation, you have to realize that our entire marriage was built on a massive misunderstanding of who I was. I met Julian 8 years ago at a real estate conference in Virginia, back when he was an ambitious young broker trying to make a name for himself. He was drawn to my quiet demeanor and military discipline, but he never bothered to look beneath the surface. My late grandfather had been an early partner in a private defense technology firm, and when he passed away, he left me a substantial equity stake alongside 2 patented satellite logistics systems that the government eventually licensed for tens of millions of dollars. I lived an exceptionally quiet life because that was how I was raised, keeping my inheritance and investment accounts in a separate, premarital trust. I drove a modest SUV, wore basic clothes, and never boasted about my personal finances, preferring to live off my standard major salary. Whenever I tried to discuss our long-term financial security with Julian early in our marriage, he would wave his hand dismissively and mockingly tell me that he did not need a military officer explaining basic budgeting to him. Eventually, I stopped trying to tell him, realizing that his fragile ego preferred believing he was the sole provider and financial brain of our household. Over the last 2 years of our marriage, Julian began pulling away as his own real estate business hit severe market turbulence. He became secretive with his phone, stayed out late under the guise of late-night property showings, and treated me more like an inconvenient roommate than a partner. It did not take long to realize he was having an affair with Chloe, a wealthy client who showered him with the public validation he craved. When my training accident occurred, Julian saw a golden opportunity to exit our marriage, framing me as an impoverished burden so he could pursue a lavish new life without looking back. My high-powered attorney, a sharp woman named Eleanor Vance, nearly laughed out loud when she reviewed the divorce agreement Julian had drafted. He had fought fiercely to retain our mortgaged suburban house, the luxury sedan, and our joint checking account containing less than $10,000. He explicitly waived all rights to any other personal assets, believing I had nothing else to offer. Eleanor looked up from the documents and asked if I wanted to inform him about the multi-million-dollar trust sitting quietly under my maiden name. I shook my head, signed the final decree, and instructed her to let him enjoy his quick victory. For the first few weeks after the divorce was finalized, Julian and Chloe flooded social media with photos of their lavish lifestyle. They took exotic vacations, purchased a brand new oceanfront property, and hosted grand parties to display their apparent success. Chloe even posted subtle jabs online, publicly thanking Julian for leaving his boring past behind to finally build a real financial empire with her. I stayed completely silent, focusing entirely on my grueling physical rehabilitation and returning to active duty at full strength. I knew that real wealth does not need to shout, and real consequences have a way of arriving without any warning. The initial crack in Julian's carefully constructed illusion appeared less than 2 months after he walked down the aisle with Chloe. Because Julian had rushed the divorce to marry quickly, he had personally guaranteed several massive commercial real estate loans using inflated estimates of our combined assets. He had mistakenly listed my military clearance credentials and mischaracterized my separate business holdings on his banking applications years ago to secure leverage, assuming I would always be there as a safety net. Once our divorce was finalized and officially registered with federal oversight databases, the bank triggered an emergency audit of his active loan portfolio. One morning, while sitting in my new apartment sipping coffee, I received an unexpected phone call from Eleanor. She informed me that Julian's primary lender had discovered major discrepancies in his financial guarantees following our legal separation. Without my implied backup assets and active government security clearance tied to his business profile, his bank deemed his commercial loans high risk and called in a $600,000 cash line of credit immediately. Julian was suddenly facing complete financial ruin, and the luxury lifestyle he had promised Chloe was beginning to crumble beneath his feet. Desperate to save his business, Julian called my office for the first time in months, his voice trembling with a mixture of panic and confusion. He demanded to know why the bank was claiming my name was attached to a multi-million-dollar defense trust that he had never heard of during our entire 7 years together. I kept my voice perfectly calm and reminded him that he had spent our entire marriage refusing to listen whenever I tried to talk about my family background. I politely reminded him that he had personally signed the divorce decree waiving all rights to my individual property before hanging up the phone. Within 6 months, the collapse of Julian's real estate firm became absolute public knowledge in our city. To satisfy his immediate bank debts, he was forced to sell the suburban home he had fought so hard to steal from me at a massive loss in a down market. Chloe, realizing that the wealthy real estate tycoon she had married was actually drowning in personal debt, filed for annulment before their first anniversary had even arrived. The grand life Julian thought he was walking into completely evaporated, leaving him with nothing but mounting legal fees, an empty bank account, and a severe loss of reputation.